The coffee cup slipped from her trembling hands, landing in shards across the tiled floor. The sound echoed too loud for such a small cafe, cutting through the murmur of morning chatter and the hiss of steaming
Milk? Her breath caught her.
Eyes froze on the man across the counter, the
Man who had just spoken her name. Claire. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't have been possible. The cafe suddenly felt colder, the air thinner, like someone had pulled the world tight around her chest.
She could barely hear the voices anymore, just the thundering of her own heart. The barista looked confused, crouched with a rag in hand, asking if she was okay. But Claire didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the stranger at the table by the window, his posture calm, his face unreadable. But his eyes, those eyes, cut right through her. They weren't just any eyes, they were familiar, dangerously familiar. Her hands stung from the coffee burns, but she barely felt it. The man leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low but steady. "I've been waiting a long time." The room tilted. She stumbled back against the counter, gripping the edge to keep herself upright. Around her, people went on sipping lattes, scrolling their phones, unaware that her entire world had just shifted off its axis. How did he know her? Why was he here?
And most haunting of all, what did he want?
2 hours earlier, Claire had been just another woman in line at the coffee shop. The morning sun filtered through wide glass windows, painting the cafe in pale gold. The smell of roasted beans hung thick in the air. Claire had tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, scrolling half-heartedly on her phone while waiting her turn. She hadn't even noticed him then, the man sitting alone by the window, nursing a black coffee as if he had nowhere else to be. Her day had started ordinary enough. Her life, ordinary enough, at least that's what she kept telling herself. Next. "Please," the barista called. Claire stepped forward, digging through her purse. She ordered her usual, a caramel latte, extra shot, no whip, and reached for her wallet. Her fingers brushed empty fabric. She froze. No wallet. Panic pricked her skin. She must have left it at home on the kitchen counter, sitting right next to her keys. Her cheeks burned as she muttered, "I'm so sorry."
A voice from behind her cut in. Calm? Certain. I'll take care of it. She turned, and that was the first time she saw him. A stranger. Dark hair, a few strands falling loose over his forehead.
A grey coat, neatly pressed, though worn at the edges, not the kind of face she would have remembered from the neighborhood. He handed his card to the barista before she could protest. Claire blinked. "You don't have to." But he just gave the smallest of nods, a polite half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's nothing," he said softly. And just like that, the transaction was done. Her drink was being made, his card slid back into his wallet. He turned away without another word, heading for the corner table by the window. She stood there, awkward and off balance. "Thank you," she called after him. He didn't answer. At least, not then. The memory burned now, colliding with the present as she stared at him across the room. Back then, it had seemed like nothing, just a kind stranger covering a small mistake. But now, with her cup shattered on the floor and his eyes locked on hers, she knew it wasn't kindness. It was something else, something heavier. The barista cleared her throat.
Miss? Do you need some water?" "You're kind of pale," Claire blinked, snapping back.
She forced a shaky laugh, crouched down, and tried to help gather the broken pieces of ceramic. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just clumsy." But her gaze flicked up again. The man hadn't moved. He was still watching. Her hands shook so badly, she cut her palm on one of the shards. She hissed under her breath. A thin line of red bloomed across her skin. And that was when he stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor was soft, but to Claire it was thunder. He crossed the cafe slowly, each step deliberate.
Not rushed, not hesitant.
Just inevitable. Her pulse raced. She wanted to run, to push through the door and vanish into the busy street outside. But she couldn't move. The man crouched beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You look just like her," he whispered. Her blood ran cold. "Excuse me?" she managed, voice cracking. His eyes flicked to hers, then down to the cut on her palm. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. Real cloth, not disposable, the kind no one carried anymore. He held it out, steady. "For the blood," he said. She didn't take it. Instead, she pulled her hand back and shook her head, forcing a brittle smile.
"I think you've mistaken me for someone else." "No," he said softly. "Not mistaken." Something in his tone, flat, unwavering, made her throat close. The barista came over with a broom, oblivious.
"It's okay, I've got this."
"You don't need to—" But Claire barely heard her.
The man leaned closer, his lips near her ear. "I didn't pay for your coffee by accident." Her skin prickled. She pulled back sharply, staring at him. "What do you mean?" she demanded. The faintest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Because I knew who you were." And that was the moment her grip faltered, sending the last piece of ceramic tumbling from her hands. The crash seemed to freeze the world around her. The man rose to his full height, placing the handkerchief gently on the counter. His gaze didn't waver. "I'll explain," he said. "Not here." Her knees went weak. She wanted answers, wanted to demand them right now, but fear clenched her throat shut. She could only watch as he turned, walked calmly back to his table, and sat down as if nothing had happened. The cafe hummed on. People laughed, cups clinked, a bus rumbled past outside. But for Claire, the world had split in two. Before the stranger, and after. She pressed her bleeding palm against her chest, eyes fixed on him, knowing with a certainty that chilled her. Her life would never be ordinary again. The morning had begun the way most of Claire's mornings did, too early, too rushed, and with the kind of autopilot rhythm that made the days blur together. Her alarm buzzed at 6:15 a.m., a tinny trill that rattled across her nightstand. She groaned, dragging a pillow over her head. The curtains in her small apartment did little to block the light creeping in from the city skyline. She should have gotten up immediately, but instead she lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of pipes in the walls.
Another day.
Another shift at the bookstore. Another string of polite smiles to customers who barely remembered her face. Finally, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet pressing against the cool wood floor. She shuffled to the tiny kitchenette. The kettle went on, a single mug waiting. Same motions every morning. This was Claire's life, quiet, predictable, and contained within the four walls of a city apartment she could just barely afford. She told herself she liked it this way. After all, quiet was safe. Still, every now and then, she would catch herself standing at the window, watching the streets below, watching the couples heading to work together, or the students laughing as they rushed to class, watching the world unfold while she stayed in her corner. She shook the thought away as she always did. By the time she left for work, the streets were already alive. A sharp wind nipped through her coat as she hurried down the block, weaving past cyclists and cars, honking at the intersection. Her route took her past the coffee shop every day. Sometimes she stopped in, sometimes she didn't. On that particular morning, she had meant only to pass by. But then she realized she hadn't eaten breakfast. Her stomach tightened, and the idea of her usual caramel latte sounded like a small comfort before the grind of shelving books and dealing with customers who wanted discounts she couldn't give. The line inside the cafe stretched nearly to the door. Claire pulled her scarf tighter, shifting from foot to foot as she waited. She scrolled her phone, glanced at the menu she knew by heart, checked the time. Always rushing, always behind. Her life was stitched together with little habits like these. Tiny choices, never extraordinary, at least until that morning. The bookstore itself was tucked into a narrow street a few blocks away, its windows stacked with novels no one had touched in weeks. The bell above the door gave its usual tired chime when Claire stepped inside. "Morning?" called a voice from behind the counter. It was Sandra, her co-worker, already perched on a stool, with a coffee in hand. Sandra was older, in her 50s, with cropped silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had the bluntness of someone who'd stopped bothering to sugarcoat life. "You're late," Sandra added. Claire held up her paper cup, a sheepish smile tugging at her lips.
"Coffee emergency," Sandra snorted.
"Every day with you it's coffee emergency." Claire laughed softly and slipped behind the counter to hang her coat. The truth was, she didn't mind Sandra's teasing. It was better than silence. In fact, Sandra was the closest thing she had to a friend in the city. The hours ticked by in their usual rhythm, customers asking for obscure titles, children running down the aisles, the endless sound of the receipt printer spitting out slips of paper. Claire moved through it all with practiced ease, but her mind kept drifting back. Back to the stranger in the cafe. She could still see his face if she closed her eyes. Not the details. She hadn't studied him long enough, but the impression. The way he had stepped in so quickly, so casually, paying for her drink before she could protest. People did nice things sometimes.
Random acts of kindness.
She told herself it was nothing. Still, the way he'd looked at her, just a flicker, brief but sharp, had left something unsettled in her chest. That evening, Claire trudged home with tired feet and an aching back. She stopped at the corner market for bread and milk, exchanged a few words with the cashier, then climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. The building was old, the kind where every step groaned under weight, and the paint on the walls peeled no matter how many times the landlord tried to cover it. Her apartment smelled faintly of old wood and lavender detergent from the laundromat downstairs. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. Dinner was toast and an apple. Her phone buzzed with a notification she ignored. She turned on the lamp, flipped through a half-read book, but the words blurred. Instead, her mind wandered back to that moment. The swipe of the stranger's card, the quick nod, the silence that followed. Why couldn't she shake it off? She sat there, staring at the ceiling again, the city noise filtering in through thin windows. And for the first time in a long while she let herself wonder, was her life really as ordinary as she kept pretending? Or was something waiting at the edges, something she couldn't yet see? Claire's backstory wasn't the kind people made movies about. No grand tragedies, no shining victories. Just a trail of half-lived moments, choices made more from fear than from courage. She had grown up in a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone and no one really left. Her parents had wanted stability for her. They urged her to become a teacher or maybe a nurse, something safe, something steady. But Claire had always felt restless, like the world outside her town was calling her name. So she left, moving to the city with little more than a suitcase and a dream she couldn't even define. At first, she thought she'd find it, the thing that made people light up when they talked about their lives. But months turned into years, and instead of chasing dreams, she settled for survival. Rent, bills, routine, safety. And somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that safety was enough. Until that morning, until the stranger. The rewind carried her back to the moment in the cafe, his voice low and steady. "I'll take care of it." The way her pulse had quickened, not from attraction, but from something harder to name.
Recognition, maybe.
Or destiny. She didn't know then that her life had already been rerouted, that the man by the window wasn't just passing through her story, he was about to rewrite it. She didn't know, but something in her bones had felt it, and that was why. Hours later, as she drifted into uneasy sleep on her worn couch, she dreamed not of books or coffee or the small apartment she called home. She dreamed of eyes watching her from across a cafe, eyes that seemed to know her better than she knew herself. The cafe was crowded, yet the stranger sat as though the room belonged to him. He hadn't ordered food, only that one black coffee, steam curling upward in faint ribbons. His posture was unhurried, his coat draped over the back of the chair. To anyone glancing his way, he might have seemed ordinary, a man waiting for someone who never came, or simply killing time. But ordinary men didn't stare with that kind of focus. Ordinary men didn't follow names with the weight of memory. From his corner seat, he watched her, Claire. He had whispered her name, and the sound of it had cracked her composure in an instant. He had seen it in the way her shoulders stiffened, the tremor in her hands as the coffee slipped. The recognition wasn't mutual. She didn't know him, not yet. But that didn't matter. He knew her, and that was enough. Claire tried to pretend she didn't notice him. She sat at the counter, fumbling with a napkin around her cut hand, forcing conversation with the barista about bandages and antiseptic. But her eyes betrayed her, flicking toward the window seat every few seconds. The man's expression didn't change. Calm, steady, waiting. It was the waiting that unnerved her most. He wasn't pressing, wasn't rushing. He seemed utterly certain that eventually she would come to him. And she hated that part of her, the smallest part, already wanted to. Outside, the city bustled. Cars surged through intersections, a bus hissed to a stop, and rain clouds gathered in the distance. But inside the cafe, time stretched thin, pulling taut between them. Finally, unable to take the silence, Claire stood. She tossed her bloodied napkin in the trash, cradled her unbandaged hand against her chest, and marched across the cafe floor. Her boots clicked against tile, loud in her own ears. She stopped at his table. "All right," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Who are you?" The man lifted his gaze, meeting hers without flinching. "Sit," he said simply, gesturing to the chair across from him. Her chest tightened. "I'm not sitting."
Answer me. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other.
Then he leaned back, his tones still maddeningly even. "I told you. I knew who you were."
That's enough for now. Her fists clenched.
She hated the way his calmness made her feel small, like she was the one out of place. "You don't just walk up to strangers, pay for their coffee, and start." "Whatever this is," she snapped. Something flickered in his eyes, not amusement, not anger, but something darker, harder. "I'm not a stranger."
Claire, her stomach dropped. "Yes."
"You are?" she said quickly, shaking her head.
"I don't know you."
"I've never seen you before in my life." He studied her, his silence heavier than words. Finally, he leaned forward, voice low. "Maybe not in this life." The air caught in her throat. "What the hell does that mean?" she whispered. But he only sipped his coffee, eyes never leaving hers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her. She fumbled it out, desperate for an excuse to step away. A text from Sandra. "Don't forget we close early tonight." Ordinary words. Safe words. Claire clung to them like a rope. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, straightening her spine. "Look," she said firmly, "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not playing, so stop following me. Don't pay for my coffee again. Don't say my name like you own it." The stranger didn't move, didn't argue, just watched. Her heart hammered as she turned and walked away, every step feeling too slow, too loud. She shoved through the cafe door, out into the chill of the street, lungs burning for air. She told herself it was over, that she would never see him again. But deep down, she already knew the truth. From the window he watched her leave, watched the way her hair caught the wind, the way her shoulders hunched, as if bracing against more than just the cold. He didn't follow her, not yet. Timing mattered. He had waited this long, years, lifetimes, depending on how one measured. A little longer wouldn't hurt. Still, as he reached into his coat pocket, his fingers brushed the folded photograph inside. Worn edges, faded ink. He slid it out just far enough to glance at it before tucking it away again. The face in the picture stared back. The resemblance, undeniable. Not just resemblance, the same. He closed his eyes, whispering words no one else could hear. "It really is you." Claire hurried down the block, her breath puffing in quick bursts. The city noise pressed against her ears, grounding her. She told herself she was being paranoid, that men said weird things all the time, that she'd never see him again. But her chest stayed tight, her cut hand still throbbing, because she couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't come into her life by chance, that he hadn't been in that cafe by accident, and worst of all, she couldn't shake the feeling he knew something about her that she didn't. Night fell quickly. Clouds gathered, spilling rain onto the streets, slicking pavement with silver reflections. Claire locked the bookstore's door, said good night to Sandra, and tucked her coat tighter. The city at night always carried a sharper edge, every shadow a little deeper, every alley a little louder. She walked fast, past the market, past the cafe now closed for the night, past the faces of strangers who blurred together. And then she felt it, a presence, not seen but sensed. Her steps quickened. She told herself not to look back, but curiosity clawed at her until she did. The street was busy, full of people under umbrellas.
No one stood out. No one lingered. Still, the feeling remained, like someone was waiting just out of sight. Watching. The stranger wasn't far.
But he didn't follow her home, not tonight. He walked parallel streets, pausing beneath street lamps, moving in shadows when crowds thickened. His gaze never wavered. Patience, that was the key, because soon the time for distance would end. And when it did, Claire wouldn't just know his name, she would remember everything. The stranger lit a cigarette outside the cafe, shielding it from the drizzle with his hand. He wasn't a smoker by habit, at least not anymore. It was just something to do when the waiting grew heavy. Smoke curled upward into the damp night. His eyes followed it, unfocused, until the city around him blurred and dissolved. In its place came the memory. A different time, a different place. He sat in a hospital corridor, the walls pale green and humming with fluorescent light. His hands trembled, stained faintly with blood. Not his own. A nurse passed by, but she didn't meet his eyes.
No one did.
He was a ghost in that place, a figure half forgotten, lingering in the shadows while the world moved on without him. Through the glass door at the end of the hall, he saw her, not Claire, but close enough that the sight of her hollowed him out. Her hair was shorter then, her laughter softer. She sat propped up in the bed, pale but smiling as though she had all the time in the world. But she didn't, and he had known it. The memory burned. He exhaled sharply, dragging himself back to the present. The cigarette hissed out in the rain. He dropped it to the sidewalk, crushing it beneath his shoe. Some ghosts refused to stay buried. Claire was proof of that. Meanwhile, Claire tossed and turned in her bed, unable to find sleep. The city's hum pressed through the thin walls, headlights streaking across her ceiling whenever a car passed below. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. That steady gaze, that handkerchief, and the words that clung to her like smoke. I knew who you were, maybe not in this life. She sat up, clutching her blanket around her shoulders. It was ridiculous, she told herself. She was letting a stranger's cryptic words spiral into something more. People said strange things all the time, especially in the city. But the unease wouldn't leave. She padded barefoot into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. Rain tapped against the window. She should feel safe here, in her own apartment. She didn't. Something inside whispered that safety had been an illusion all along. Elsewhere, the stranger moved through the night. He knew the city's back streets, the alleys where no one asked questions, the corners where shadows stretched long. He walked with a purpose, but not in haste. Every so often, he pulled the photograph from his coat pocket, running his thumb along the edges. The picture was worn from years of folding and unfolding. The ink faded. The woman in the photo smiled faintly, her eyes holding the same quiet depth as Claire's. Different name, different time, but the same soul, at least. That's what he believed, what he had been waiting to prove. Morning broke grey and heavy. Claire dragged herself out of bed with the weight of restless dreams pressing down. She moved through her morning ritual in silence, the kettle, the mug, the steam, every motion mechanical. She hesitated before leaving the apartment, half expecting to find him waiting outside. But the street was empty, just a delivery truck rumbling past, a mother pulling her child along in the rain. She told herself that was good, that maybe he had already moved on. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched anyway. At the bookstore, Sandra noticed immediately. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, handing Claire a stack of returns. "Thanks," Claire muttered. Running a hand through her hair, Sandra narrowed her eyes. "What's going on with you?" "Don't say nothing, I've been around too long for that." Claire hesitated, chewing her lip. She wanted to brush it off, to pretend everything was fine. But the words slipped out before she could stop them. "There was a guy at the cafe yesterday," she said quietly. "He paid for my drink."
And then he knew my name.
"He said things that didn't make sense." Sandra's brows knitted. "What kind of things?"
Like he knew me. Really knew me.
"But I've never seen him before." Sandra was silent for a moment, studying her. Then she snorted softly. "Sounds like some creep with a line. City's full of them."
"Ignore him," Claire forced a laugh, nodding.
"Yeah, you're probably right." But she wasn't sure. That night, the stranger dreamed. He dreamed of fire. Buildings collapsing in smoke and flame, screams tearing through the night. And her, always her, standing at the center of it all. Not Claire, not yet, but the same face, the same eyes. Her hand reaching for his as the world came apart around them. He woke with a start, drenched in sweat, his breath ragged. For a moment, he thought he was back there, in the ruins, in the ashes. But no, the city outside was whole. The only flames were the neon signs flickering through the rain. Still the dream clung to him like ash. He pressed his palms to his eyes. He couldn't let it happen again. Not this time. This time he would reach her before it was too late. The next day, Claire avoided the cafe. She took a different route to work, hugging her coat tighter against the drizzle. She told herself it was because she was saving money, because she didn't need the caffeine, but she knew the truth. She was afraid of seeing him again, and yet part of her hated the fear, hated the way he had unsettled her so easily. She had built her life around routine, around control, and with a few words, he had cracked it open. She didn't want to admit how much of her restlessness he had stirred awake. The stranger watched from across the street as she passed. He didn't approach, not yet. Timing mattered, but he was closer now. Always closer. Claire reached the bookstore, pushing open the door with a tired sigh. She dropped her bag behind the counter, the bell chiming overhead. And that was when she saw it. A folded handkerchief, white linen resting neatly on the counter. The same one he had tried to give her in the cafe. Her blood ran cold. Sandra? she called, her voice thin. "Did someone come in here earlier?" Sandra looked up from the back, frowning.
"Not that I saw. Why?"
Claire swallowed hard, her eyes locked on the handkerchief. "No reason," she whispered. But inside, her pulse hammered with a single truth. He had been here, and he wasn't going away. The handkerchief stayed on the counter long after the last customer left. Claire tried to ignore it, tried to shove it into the drawer under the register and forget. But every time her hand brushed the fabric, a chill ran through her veins. It wasn't just cloth. It was proof. Proof he had been there. Proof he knew where to find her. By closing time, she couldn't stand it anymore. She wrapped the handkerchief in brown paper and stuffed it deep into her bag.
Out of sight, maybe out of mind.
But even as she locked up and stepped into the drizzle-soaked street, she felt its weight pressing against her shoulder. The city looked different that night.
Street lamps cast halos in the mist, cars hissed over wet pavement, and every face seemed sharper, every shadow deeper. Claire walked quickly, her boots splashing through puddles.
Her eyes flicked from window reflections to alley corners, searching for him. She told herself she was being paranoid, that he wasn't there. And yet, at the end of the block, a man stood beneath a flickering streetlight. His coat collar turned up, his face half hidden in the dark. Claire's breath caught. She slowed, her stomach twisting. The man didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't turn away, just waited. She forced herself to keep walking, every step heavy. When she reached the corner, she risked a glance back. The streetlight flickered again. He was gone. Inside her apartment, Claire locked the door and slid the chain into place. She leaned against the wood, pressing her forehead to it, her pulse rattling like loose glass. She kicked off her boots, peeled out of her damp coat, and sank onto the couch. The handkerchief sat like a stone in her bag. She pulled it out, unwrapped the paper, and stared at it under the lamp. White linen. A faint embroidered initial in the corner. Her mind raced. Who was he? What did he want from her? And why did she feel like she should already know the answer? Days blurred. Claire avoided the cafe. She stopped taking her usual route home. She even skipped shifts at the bookstore, texting Sandra vague excuses about headaches. But none of it helped. The signs kept appearing. One morning, she found a single daisy tucked under her apartment door. No note, just the flower, its stem wet from the rain. Another day, she unlocked the bookstore to find a book sitting on the counter that no one remembered putting there.
A worn novel, its spine cracked, its title nearly faded. The Return. And each time,
her chest tightened with the same fear. It was him. Always him, Sandra noticed. "You're jumpy," she said one afternoon, handing Claire a cup of tea. "Like a rabbit that knows the fox is near." Claire forced a shaky laugh. "Great. Exactly the look I'm going for." Sandra set the cup down firmly. "This about that guy again?" Claire hesitated, then nodded.
"I keep finding things."
"Little things."
"I think it's him." Sandra's expression hardened.
"Then you go to the police." "Don't wait until it gets worse." "I don't even know what to tell them," Claire whispered. "That a stranger bought me coffee and now I keep finding flowers, books."
"They'll think I'm crazy." Sandra leaned closer, her voice sharp.
"Then let them think it."
"Crazy's better than dead." The words hit Claire like a slap.
She stared at Sandra, wide-eyed, but her co-worker just sipped her tea as if nothing had changed. And deep down, Claire knew Sandra was right. That night, Claire dreamed. She was standing in a field of white daisies, the horizon burning orange with sunset. A figure stood in the distance, too far to see clearly, but close enough that she knew it was him. He raised a hand, beckoning, and against her will she stepped forward. Each step felt heavier, the flowers clutching at her ankles, the sky darkening with every breath. She tried to stop, to turn back, but her feet moved without her consent. When she reached him, his face came into focus. It wasn't the face she knew. It was older, harder, marked by scars she had never seen, but the eyes were the same. "You promised," he whispered. She woke with a scream. Her sheets tangled, sweat soaking her skin. The clock read 3:17 a.m. Her apartment was silent, but she wasn't alone. She felt it, deep in her bones, a presence in the dark. Her eyes darted to the window. The curtains were drawn, but a shadow shifted against the fabric, blotting out the faint glow of the street lamp. Someone was standing outside, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. She just sat frozen, her pulse hammering, waiting for the knock that never came. After what felt like hours, the shadow faded. The curtains swayed with the draft, and the glow of the street lamp returned. He was gone. The next morning, Claire dragged herself into the bookstore on trembling legs. She barely heard Sandra's greeting, barely managed to smile for the customers. Her mind was a haze of exhaustion and dread. But in the quiet moments between transactions, she replayed the dream. The field, the sky, his scarred face, and the word that lingered like smoke, promised. Promised what?
Promised when?
And how could a stranger know something she didn't even remember? Across the street, the man watched through the bookstore window. He didn't enter. He didn't speak. He only watched. And in his hand, he held the photograph. Not the one he always carried. The other one. The one he rarely let himself look at. The photo was torn, its corners burned, but the image was still clear enough. Claire's face, not as she was now, but younger. Different clothes, different time, her eyes shining with the same quiet fire, the same soul. He tucked the photo away before she could look up and see him. Patience, he reminded himself. Soon she would understand. But patience was the one thing Claire no longer had. Because the glass she had built around her life, the safety, the routine, the ordinary, was cracking, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. The bookstore's bell chimed as Claire flipped the sign to closed. Her hands shook as she gathered the till, sliding bills into neat stacks. She tried to breathe, to pretend this was normal, but the silence pressed in too heavily. Every creak of the old building made her flinch. Sandra had offered to walk her home again, but Claire lied, saying she was fine. She wasn't. She knew it. And yet something inside her had shifted. Fear had become unbearable. Living in constant dread, waiting for him to appear. It was worse than facing him outright. So tonight, she told herself, would be different. Tonight, she wouldn't run. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened under the lamps, wet as ink. Claire walked slowly, scanning every corner, every dark alley. Halfway down Maple Avenue, she felt it again. That prickle, the weight of eyes. She stopped, her breath frosting in the cool air. Her heart pounded against her ribs. "Come out," she whispered. Silence. Her fingers curled into fists. "I know you're there." For a moment she thought she was wrong. That maybe, for once, she was alone. Then, a figure detached from the shadows. The man in the dark coat. The same face, pale beneath the streetlight, eyes fixed on her, as if she were the only person in the world. Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to bolt.
Every nerve screamed for her to run, but she forced her feet to stay. "Why are you following me?"
she demanded. The man's voice was low, roughened by years of disuse.
"Because I had to." That's not an answer. Her voice shook, but she steadied it with anger.
"Who are you?" He took a step forward. She stepped back. "You don't remember," he said softly.
Almost mournfully, "Remember what?"
Another step. The space between them shrank. Claire's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She wanted to scream to call for help, but the street was empty.
Only his eyes held her, locking her in place. "You promised me," he whispered. Her blood ran cold. That word, again.
From her dream. Promised. She shook her head violently.
"No, I don't know you. I've never—" "You did," he cut in. His voice cracked, and for a second, the mask slipped.
Pain flickered across his face, raw and human. "A long time ago," Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. "You're insane." He flinched, just barely, as if the word stung. But then he nodded once, stepped back into the dark, and was gone. Just like that. Claire stumbled home, her legs weak beneath her. She slammed the door shut, locked it, chained it, then pressed her back to it, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her mind spun. The words wouldn't stop echoing, "You promised me, you don't remember." She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to shut it out, but she couldn't, because part of her, deep, buried, felt the pull of recognition. Not in his face, not in his voice, in something deeper, and that terrified her most of all. Across the city, the man sat in a room barely bigger than a closet. The wallpaper peeled, the radiator ticked, and a single lamp lit the photograph spread across the table. Dozens of them, Claire's face caught at different angles.
Entering the cafe,
Leaving the bookstore, sitting on a bench in the park with a book in her lap. But among the photos of her present was one that didn't belong. The oldest one. The one he carried closest to his heart. The same girl, but in a different world. A photograph stained by time, its corners brittle,
its edges charred. The girl smiling in that picture had been his whole life once. And he had sworn that he would find her again, that he would never let the promise break. Days passed.
But Claire couldn't focus on anything. She walked through work like a ghost. Every reflection made her jump. Every sound made her twitch. She avoided Sandra's questions, offering half-hearted smiles, brushing off concern. Inside, she was unraveling. And then the dreams returned. Again the field of daisies.
Again the horizon burning. Again the figure waiting. But this time she reached him. And when she looked into his face, she didn't see a stranger. She saw familiarity. A memory just out of reach. His hand touched hers, rough and scarred, and her chest ached with a sorrow she couldn't name. "You left me," he said. Not accusing, not angry.
Just broken. She woke with tears streaking her cheeks. The next morning, Claire made a choice. Running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. There was only one option left. She would confront him, not in the shadows where he held control, but in the open. She would make him answer. So she left her apartment and walked, every step, trembling but determined.
Past the bookstore,
Past the cafe, past the blocks where she had seen him lurking, until she reached the park, the same park where she had once sat with her coffee. Where this nightmare began, the benches were slick with rain, the trees dripped quietly, and he was there. Sitting alone, watching the water ripple in the fountain, as if he had been waiting. Claire's throat tightened. Her palms were damp, but she forced her legs forward until she stood before him. "Enough," she said, her voice sharp. "You're going to tell me who you are."
Right now, he lifted his gaze slowly.
His eyes glistened with something she couldn't name. "You really don't know," he murmured. "Stop saying that." Her voice cracked. "Stop talking in riddles. Just tell me." He rose from the bench, tall and solemn, the rain beading on his dark coat. Then he reached into his pocket. Claire's chest seized. She stumbled back, half expecting a weapon, but he only pulled out a photograph, and when he handed it to her, the ground dropped out from under her feet. The photograph was old, yellowed, its surface cracked, but she recognized the girl instantly. It was her face, her eyes, but not here.
Not now. This was another time.
Another world. And beside her in the photo stood him, his younger self, whole and unscarred. Claire's breath left her in a shudder.
Her vision blurred.
She whispered.
This isn't possible. His voice was low, aching with truth. It was us.
The photograph trembled in Claire's hands. Her breath came uneven, fogging the glass of the frame as though even the air between her and the image was fragile. She stared at the girl, her own face, impossibly familiar yet impossibly distant. The hair was shorter, the clothes out of step with anything she had ever worn. But the eyes were hers, and beside her, smiling with an arm slung across her shoulder, was him, younger, cleaner, whole. Claire's knees weakened, and she sank onto the wet bench. The photo nearly slipped from her fingers. Her voice cracked. This can't be real. The man sat down slowly across from her, the weight of years in his movements. It's real, he said simply. No. Claire shook her head, hard, as though the motion itself could scatter the thought.
This is some trick.
You found a picture, doctored it, something doctored. His laugh was bitter, short. You think I spent years in the shadows to trick you with a photograph? Claire wanted to scream, wanted to fling the picture away, but her hand refused to move. Her eyes were caught in the smile she didn't remember ever smiling. Who is she? Claire demanded hoarsely. Tell me.
Who is this girl who looks like me?
The man leaned forward, his gaze piercing.
It is you. Her stomach flipped.
She clutched the photo tighter, as though breaking it might break his words. That's impossible. Not impossible, he said softly. Just forgotten. For a long moment the rain was the only sound between them. Drops pattered on the fountain, hissed against the pavement, slid cold and steady down Claire's neck. And in that rhythm, something stirred. A memory. Not full, not clear, just a flicker. The smell of wood smoke, laughter, a hand brushing hers. Claire's breath hitched. She shut her eyes, but the flicker remained, dancing just out of reach. When she opened them again, the man was watching her as if he already knew. You feel it, he whispered. No. Claire shot to her feet, clutching the photograph.
I don't know you. I don't know this girl. This isn't my life.
Her voice broke against the park's silence, and yet, even as she denied it, her chest throbbed with an ache she couldn't explain. That night, the dreams came harder, the daisies stretched endless in every direction. The sun bled into the horizon, staining the petals red, and the figure waited, closer than before, his shadow stretching long across the field. This time, Claire didn't walk to him, she ran. Her feet pounded the earth, and with each step, pieces of memory burst like shards of glass. A cabin on a hill, a fire crackling in the hearth, laughter over cheap wine, and his voice, warm.
Alive, unbroken, I'll find you, he said.
Even if it takes forever.
I promise. Claire jolted awake with the words ringing in her skull.
Her sheets were damp with sweat, her pulse ragged. She pressed her palms to her eyes, whispering to the empty room, No, no, no. No. But the truth was clawing at her, undeniable. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the ordinary years of bookstores and coffee and city rain, she remembered. Meanwhile, across the city the man sat in his dim apartment, turning a knife over in his hands. Not to use, it was old, rusted, ceremonial more than practical. The last thing she had given him. The only thing that survived. He set it down beside the photograph, tracing the edge of her younger smile with his fingertip. He had waited so long. Too long. Sometimes he wondered if he had made her up, if grief had twisted his mind into seeing ghosts. But then she looked at him on the street with those same eyes, and he knew. He had not been wrong. She was here. She had returned, and she would remember. Claire didn't tell Sandra. She couldn't. How could she explain that her nights were filled with memories that didn't belong to her? That she woke with the scent of smoke in her nose, the sound of his laughter still echoing in her ears? Sandra would call the hospital.
Call the police.
Lock her away. So Claire kept silent, but silence didn't stop the memories. Each day, more pieces slipped through, the curve of a wooden doorframe, the scratch of his handwriting on parchment, the weight of a silver chain around her neck. She caught herself humming songs she had never learned, words slipping onto her tongue in a language she didn't know. It was madness. It had to be. And yet it felt more real than the life she had lived. On the third night, she returned to the park, not because she wanted to, because she had to. She needed answers. She needed him to explain. He was waiting on the same bench,
as though he had never moved. Claire's steps slowed as she approached. Her fists clenched tight around the photograph. "This isn't possible," she said, her voice raw. "It can't be. None of this." He looked at her, and his eyes softened. Grief and tenderness tangled together. "I told you I'd find you," he murmured. The words punched through her chest.
She staggered back, the ground spinning, because they weren't new. They weren't strange. She had heard them before, in her dream, in her memory, in another life. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the bench, gasping for air. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. The man's voice trembled. "You're remembering." But remembering wasn't simple. It wasn't gentle. That night, when Claire closed her eyes, the dam broke. Visions crashed through her like a flood.
Fire and ash, screams in the dark.
His hand clutching hers as the world tore apart around them, and her own voice choked with tears. "Find me."
"Promise me you'll find me." His reply, steady and unshaken, even as blood stained his lips. "I swear." Claire woke sobbing, her body curled tight, her throat raw.
She buried her face in her pillow, clutching the photograph to her chest like a lifeline. The ache in her heart was no longer confusion, it was grief. Because deep down, she finally knew. This wasn't their first meeting, and if the memories were true, it hadn't ended well the first time. He hadn't spoken of it in years, not to anyone. The story lived inside him like a wound that never healed, festering in silence, feeding his obsession. Most days he didn't dare touch it, because to remember was to bleed all over again. But sitting across from Claire in the rain-soaked park, seeing her tremble with a fear that was laced with recognition, he knew he could no longer keep it hidden. She deserved the truth, even if it destroyed her. He began with a name.
His old name, Matthew. Claire blinked at him, startled by the sudden normalcy of it. A name, just a name, but her body shivered.
Somewhere in the depths of memory, it resonated like an echo. "You don't remember," he said quietly. "But the once you said my name like it was a prayer. You swore you'd never forget it." Claire clutched the photograph tighter.
"And what was my name then?" His voice broke. "Elena." The word struck her like a blow. Elena. It didn't belong to her.
And yet, when she closed her eyes, she heard it whispered in the crackle of firelight, spoken with warmth and tenderness she had never known in this life. Her stomach twisted. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you asked me to." Matthew leaned back, his eyes drifting beyond the park, to a time far removed. "It was another world," he said. "Another time, long before this city, before the streets and lights and noise. We lived in a village, small, quiet. You were the daughter of a wood carver. I was the blacksmith's apprentice. Life was simple then, hard, but simple, and we loved each other."
"From the beginning, I think."
like it was always meant to be. His gaze softened, lost in the glow of memory. You had this way of laughing, loud enough to fill the whole square. You'd bring me bread you baked with your mother, even when you barely had enough for yourself. You never thought twice about giving. That was you, Elena, always giving. Claire's chest ached, her throat thick. She wanted to dismiss it as delusion, but the way his voice carried, the way his eyes glistened with the weight of it, made denial falter. "And then?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. His face darkened. Then came the fire. The memories clawed at him as he spoke, but he forced himself to continue. They came in the night.
Raiders, soldiers, whatever they were, we never knew.
They burned everything.
Houses, fields, the people who couldn't run fast enough. I fought.
God, I fought with everything I had. But I was just a boy with a hammer, and they had blades and fire. I remember the heat on my face, the smoke choking my lungs, and I remember you. His eyes flicked back to Claire, pain searing his expression.
You wouldn't leave me.
Even as the fire closed in, even as I screamed for you to run, you stayed. Claire's hands trembled. Her pulse pounded in her ears. And yet, beneath the terror, an image rose, flames licking the sky, her fingers locked in his, refusing to let go. Her lips parted. She hadn't told him. She hadn't said a word, but she remembered. Matthew nodded slowly, reading the truth in her face. "You see it now," he said softly. The memories spiraled deeper. We made it to the riverbank. We thought we'd escape, but one of them followed us.
I fought him. I don't even remember how.
Just rage, terror.
I killed him with my bare hands.
But he got me first.
Cut me across the face, the chest. I was dying. Matthew's fingers brushed the scar running from his temple to his jaw.
The mark that had haunted Claire since the first day. And you wouldn't stop crying. You held me, begging me not to go.
I told you I couldn't promise that.
But I could promise something else. His voice dropped, heavy with the weight of decades. I swore to find you again, no matter what it took, no matter how long.
I swore I would not let death be the end. Claire's breath shuddered out of her.
Her knuckles were white around the photograph. "And then?" she asked faintly. Matthew closed his eyes. Then the fire came for us, and there was nothing left. Silence wrapped the park. The fountain's water whispered, but the world felt still. Claire's mind reeled. Every word felt impossible, insane, reincarnation, past lives, promises carried across death, and yet her dreams.
Her memories.
The way her body reacted before her mind could catch up. It wasn't just his story.
It was theirs. She had lived it too, even if she hadn't wanted to admit it. Tears burned her eyes.
She swallowed hard, shaking her head. If that's true, why me?
Why now? Why here?
Matthew's gaze fell, shadowed. That's the question I've been asking for years. He told her about the wandering. After the fire, there was nothing.
Only darkness.
Until somehow he awoke again, in another body, another place, different century, different life, but always with the same emptiness and always with the photograph. It was impossible, but it had been there, waiting with him, a relic that shouldn't exist, tied to him as tightly as his scars, and with it the memory of her. He searched for her face in every life, through towns and cities, wars and years. Sometimes he thought he caught glimpses, women who looked like her, who smiled like her. But when he approached, it was never the same. Until now. Until her. "You're the first who looked at me," he said hoarsely. And I knew.
I knew in my bones. Claire's tears slipped free, hot against her skin.
She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to shoulder the weight of something so vast, so terrifying, but her heart told her what her mind couldn't. She had been his Elena. She had made him that promise. And now Sitting across from him in a city that hadn't existed in the world they once knew, she was breaking all over again. "I don't remember everything," she whispered. "You will," he said. His eyes held both sorrow and certainty. The soul doesn't forget.
It just waits. She pressed the photograph to her chest, her voice trembling. "And if I don't want to remember?"
His expression darkened, his jaw tight. "Then I've lost you twice." The words hung in the air.
Raw and final. Claire turned away, staring at the wet pavement.
Her reflection fractured in the puddles. Part of her wanted to run, to hide, to bury herself in denial, but another part, a deeper, aching part, knew that no matter how far she fled, the truth would follow, because promises had weight, and hers had lasted longer than life itself. Claire didn't sleep, not after Matthew's confession, not after the photograph. She lay awake until the sky paled, staring at the ceiling as if answers might form in the cracks. But there were no answers, only echoes, the smell of smoke, the burn of fire. His voice in her dreams, swearing he'd find her. Every time her eyes drifted shut, it came rushing back. Faces she had never known but somehow loved. A world she had never lived in but somehow mourned. By morning, her chest ached with the weight of two lives pressing against each other, and she couldn't tell which was hers anymore. At the bookstore, Sandra noticed immediately. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, sliding a stack of returns across the counter. Claire managed a weak laugh. "Thanks, just what I needed." But her hands shook as she sorted the books. Her mind wasn't in the here and now. It was trapped between centuries, between promises and firelight. Sandra leaned on the counter, studying her. "This about the guy again?" Claire froze. Sandra's eyes narrowed.
"It is, isn't it?"
"He's still hanging around?" Claire wanted to say no, wanted to brush it off, to protect her friend from the madness unraveling her life. But the words slipped out before she could stop them. "He says he knows me." Sandra's brow furrowed. "Knows you how?" Claire swallowed hard. "From before." Sandra blinked, waiting for more. But how could she explain reincarnation, promises across lifetimes, dreams that bled into memory? She laughed it off instead, a brittle sound.
"Forget it. It's stupid." Sandra didn't look convinced. "Claire, you're scaring me." "I'm fine," Claire said quickly.
Too quickly. But inside she knew she wasn't fine at all. That evening, she didn't go home. Her apartment felt too small, too fragile. The walls pressed in on her, whispering of promises she wasn't ready to face. Instead, she walked through streets slick with rain, past neon signs buzzing faintly in the dark, past the cafe where it all began. Everywhere she went, she saw him, not always in flesh but in reflection.
A face in the window, a shadow in the alley. Her heart raced, her pulse ragged.
She couldn't escape him because part of her didn't want to. That was the worst of it. She feared him. She hated what he made her remember. And yet, deep down, she longed for the warmth she had felt in her dreams, the warmth of a love that had survived fire and death. She found him in the park again. Always the park. Matthew rose from the bench as she approached,
rain dripping from his coat. "You came?" he said softly. Her jaw clenched. "I shouldn't have." "But you did." His eyes searched hers, desperate, pleading. "Tell me you feel it too." Claire's chest tightened. "I feel..."
She shook her head, trembling.
"I don't even know what I feel. You remember? Fragments?" Her voice cracked.
"Dreams, pieces, nothing whole." "It's enough," he urged.
"It means the rest will come." Claire's anger flared, masking her fear. "Do you hear yourself? You've been following me, stalking me.
Leaving things at my door.
You scared me half to death, and now you want me to believe it's all because of some past life fairy tale."
Matthew flinched, pain flashing across his face. "It wasn't meant to scare you."
I couldn't lose you again."
Not when I'd finally found you. Claire's breath came sharp, her words trembling with fury and grief. But I'm not her.
I'm not Eleanor, I'm Claire.
This is my life, my time.
I didn't ask for any of this. The words sliced the air between them. Matthew's face twisted, torn between sorrow and desperation.
You can deny it all you want, but the soul doesn't lie.
I know you. Even if you don't remember, I do. Claire turned away, tears stinging her eyes.
Then maybe the mistake was finding me. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rain whispered in the branches overhead. The fountain bubbled endlessly, and between them stretched a chasm of lifetimes impossible to cross. Finally, Matthew's voice broke it, low, hoarse, trembling. Do you know what it's like to search for someone across centuries, to wake in 100 different skins, 100 different names, and still feel the same emptiness? Carry a promise that gnaws at you, never letting you rest. His hands trembled as he spoke. I've lived lifetimes chasing the sound of your voice, the curve of your smile.
Every time I thought I found you, it was a ghost, a shadow. Until now. Until you. Claire's tears blurred her vision.
His words dug deep, striking chords she didn't want to hear. But another voice whispered inside her. And what about me? What about the life she had built here, the person she had become? Did it all mean nothing, reduced to an echo of someone she once was? Sandra's words came back to her, sharp and grounding. Crazy's better than dead. Claire wiped her face, standing abruptly.
This isn't love.
It's obsession. Matthew rose too, his expression desperate.
It's more than love. It's destiny. Destiny?
Her voice cracked with bitter laughter. Destiny is me working at a bookstore, drinking too much coffee, trying to pay rent on time.
Not this, not you. Matthew stepped closer, his eyes blazing. You can run from me.
You can scream, curse, deny it, but deep down, you know. You feel it.
Every dream, every flicker of memory proves it. You're mine.
You've always been mine, Claire's breath caught. The words hung heavy, teetering between devotion and threat. And for the first time, she saw not just love in his eyes, but madness. Fear surged. She backed away, shaking her head.
Stay away from me! Matthew froze, the plea in his eyes collapsing into anguish. Claire, no!
Her voice cut through the park, sharp and final. If you ever cared about me, her, whoever, then let me go. Because right now, you're destroying me. The words shattered something between them. Matthew staggered back as if struck, his shoulders heaving, his face twisted with pain. For a moment, it seemed he might break completely. That the centuries of searching, of promises carried through lifetimes, would crumble into dust at her rejection. But then his eyes hardened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. You can't escape what you are. He turned and vanished into the dark, leaving Claire trembling, drenched in rain and tears, alone with the weight of a promise she never remembered making. That night, Claire sat in her apartment, the photograph spread on the table before her. She stared at Elena's face, at Matthew's younger smile, at the world that no longer existed. And for the first time, she wished she could burn it, because maybe if it turned to ash, so would the memories, so would the promise. But her hand refused to move, and she knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, that no fire could erase what bound them. The only question was whether it would save her or destroy her. The rain had stopped by morning, but the city still carried the smell of it, wet stone, damp earth, the metallic tang of water running in gutters. Claire hadn't slept again. She hadn't eaten. She sat on the floor of her apartment, knees pulled to her chest, the photograph clutched in her hand. Every time she tried to let it go, her fingers tightened around it, her phone buzzed on the counter. Once, twice, 3 times. She didn't answer, but when the knock came at her door, steady and unrelenting, her heart lurched. She knew who it was, and she knew she couldn't hide forever. Matthew stood in the hall, his coat hanging heavy, his eyes red-rimmed as though he hadn't slept either. For a moment,
They just stared at each other, no words?
no defences. Finally, Claire stepped aside. He entered without a sound. The apartment felt too small for the both of them, every wall pressing in, every shadow sharp with tension. Claire placed the photograph on the table between them like evidence in a trial. "Explain," she said simply. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. Matthew lowered himself into the chair across from her, his every movement slow, careful, as though afraid she might shatter if he moved too quickly. "I already told you," he said softly. "We knew each other. Once." Claire's jaw tightened.
That's not enough. I want the truth, all of it.
"No more riddles, no more following me in the dark." "Who are you, Matthew?" "Really?" The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then he spoke. "My name wasn't always Matthew," he began. His voice carried the weight of centuries, roughened by loss. "I've had more names than I can count, but the first one that mattered was Elias of Duvrin, a blacksmith's son with nothing to my name but calloused hands and the dream of a life bigger than the one I was born into." Claire's throat went dry. Elias. The name curled around her like smoke, like something half-remembered. He continued, "I met you, Eleanor, when the world was smaller, when fire ruled more than reason."
You were a scholar's daughter, fierce, brilliant. You hated the cage your family tried to put you in. Claire's breath quickened.
Images flickered at the edges of her mind, candlelight on parchment, laughter in the courtyard, the brush of fingertips against hers. "I shouldn't have loved you," Matthew whispered. "But I did. We swore we'd find each other, no matter what time, no matter what world."
And then the fire came. His voice cracked, raw with centuries of grief.
"I lost you in the smoke. You died in my arms."
I thought it was the end. Claire felt tears sting her eyes, unbidden. But it wasn't, he said.
The years passed, centuries. I woke again, different name, different skin, but the same memory burned in me.
Always you.
Always Elena. He reached across the table, his hand trembling as it hovered near hers. "I found you once in Florence."
Once in Lisbon. Once in a village I don't even remember the name of.
"But it was never enough. You slipped through my fingers every time."
And then, his voice faltered, and then I walked into a cafe. And there you were.
Coffee cup in hand.
Same eyes, same soul. And I knew. Claire's chest tightened so sharply it hurt. Because deep down, she knew too. Not with logic.
Not with proof, but with something older, deeper. She remembered the fire. She remembered his arms. She remembered the promise whispered through smoke. "Find me." Her breath hitched. "Why now?" She whispered. "Why this life?" Matthew shook his head.
I don't know.
Maybe fate.
Maybe punishment. All I know is that I couldn't walk away this time. Not again. Tears slid down her cheeks, hot and relentless. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?"
She cried, her voice breaking.
"You shattered my life.
You made me question everything I am."
I don't even know who Claire is anymore, because all I see now is her." "Elena," he whispered. "No."
She slammed her fists against the table, the sound sharp as thunder.
"Don't call me that. That's not me. Not anymore." Matthew recoiled as though struck. Silence fell again. Heavy, suffocating. Claire wiped her face with shaking hands. "I'm not her."
"But I'm not untouched either."
"I feel it. I remember pieces. And I hate you for it."
"Because I didn't ask for this." Matthew's voice was barely audible.
"I know." His eyes glistened.
"And if you tell me to go, I will."
"I'll vanish forever. But I had to tell you. I had to give you the truth, even if it breaks me." The room seemed to tilt.
The air thick with a choice that weighed more than lifetimes. Claire rose, pacing, her mind a storm. If she let him stay, If she let herself believe, it meant surrendering to something she could never control, something that had hunted her through time. But if she sent him away, if she severed this bond, it meant denying a truth her soul already knew. Her reflection caught in the window, her face pale, tear-streaked, but behind it she almost saw another.
Eleanor's a girl who had once loved fiercely,
who had once sworn never to let go, and Claire realized she wasn't just Elena, she wasn't just Claire, she was both, and the choice was hers. Slowly, she turned back to Matthew. He looked broken, waiting for her to end him with a single word. Instead, she whispered, "If I let you stay, you have to promise me something." Matthew swallowed hard.
anything. Her eyes burned into his.
No more shadows.
No more stalking. No more leaving things at my door like a ghost. If you want me, you face me, here, now, as who we are, not as fragments.
Not as obsessions. His breath trembled.
I swear it. She stepped closer, her heartbeat thundering. And you accept that I'm not just Elena, I'm Claire. I have a life, a job.
A world that matters.
You don't get to erase it. His hand rose, tentative, brushing away one of her tears.
I wouldn't erase it. I just want to be part of it. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Then we start here. No promises across lifetimes.
No destiny.
Just us. Matthew's eyes closed, relief shuddering through him. When he opened them again, they were full of something softer.
Not obsession, not desperation, hope. They stood there.
In the quiet hum of the city beyond the window, two souls heavy with centuries, choosing, at last, to meet in the present. Not as Elias and Elena, not as echoes of fire and ash, but as Matthew and Claire. And though the past whispered still, for the first time the future whispered louder. Weeks later, Claire sat in the cafe again, the same one where it had all begun. Her coffee steamed before her, the morning sun spilling across the table. Matthew slid into the seat across from her, a crooked smile on his lips. No dramatic entrances this time, she teased, though her voice was warm. No need, he said softly.
I'm exactly where I should be. She looked at him for a long moment, the weight of centuries flickering behind her eyes, then smiled faintly. For now, she murmured. And somehow, that was enough.